Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. I am joined in this episode by retired Marine Corps Colonel Bill Anderson, who is the author of The Bravest Deeds of Men, a battlefield guide for Belleau Wood. Bill, it's nice to see you and to see what appears to be a near museum behind you. It looks like you have a lot to talk about in terms of possible artifacts that have been an important part of a trip to the Western Front or a pilgrimage in particular to Belleau Wood or related to Belleau Wood.
I have accumulated a few items over the years, yeah. But
Is there one in particular you'd like to talk about?
Well, the uniform blouse behind me is an early 20th century Marine Corps forest green blouse of the period, and it's unique because it doesn't have holes in the collar, which was something that was added later after the war. But it's it's an authentic blouse of the period with a victory medal and an Croix de Guerre medal on it from that period as well. And it also has on the left shoulder what's referred to as the Croix de Guerre aiguillette from that was given to the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments by the commanding general of the French Army after Belleau Wood. And then to my right is a World War I helmet that was used by the Marines after the war. I mean, later in the war, when the hostilities were over, and they added the regimental and battalion insignia, and this is a yellow diamond, which is equivalent or stands for the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines. And then they would put an eagle globe and anchor on it.
Do you have any interesting stories about how you acquired these items?
No, I just I found them online, various and a couple of auctions over the years. I've got some weapons as well that I've accumulated, and then some other Marine Corps uniforms from the period. The summer, like a summer uniform, is a cotton khaki uniform, and a formal blues blouse as well from that period. And during the war, is different from the Army uniforms. So the Marine Corps didn't have the holes in the collars for the service, what they called collar discs. And it was only after when they started to be issued Army uniforms in the war, late in the war, that they got permission to put eagle globe and anchors in those collars, which is something that continued, to the present day.
It's very sharp, the collar insignia. I was hoping to hear some story about an eBay war bidding war that you got into with somebody.
No, I think I was fortunate enough. I think in auctions that I've done it long enough that you kind of establish what you think it's worth, and then you set a ceiling. And if it goes over, then it's too bad, And which I've lost a couple of things I would have really liked to have, but other things, I set a ceiling. And if anybody who does auctions probably does the same thing as well,
Bumped into a few, especially World War I people who are not so pragmatic. And the auction ceiling doesn't seem to, almost all bets are off when it comes to a bidding ceiling for items on eBay having to do with the First World War.
Well, I think I've seen some of those I don't. I may have participated in one or two if it was something particularly interesting that I hadn't, something rare you hadn't seen before, and it wasn't going to be too expensive.
So you have authored a guidebook about Belleau Wood called The Bravest Deeds of Men, and it's a fantastic guidebook, very detailed. We're going to get into some of the details about that book. And before I do, I'd like to hear about your background in the Marine Corps and how you ended up with the amazing opportunity to spend so much time in Belleau Wood and in Europe in general.
Sure. Well, I was on active duty at the end of during Vietnam and at the end, and was sent to headquarters Marine Corps in Washington D.C. And I decided that I was going to leave active duty and go into the reserves, which I did, and I was a lawyer in the Department of the Navy. Doing which was my interest, was international law and military operations, that kind of thing. And I met a gentleman during a trip to Brussels, a NATO legal meeting, and I happened to off cuff during lunch ask him if he was aware of any opportunities in an international environment like that that might be available. And he said, well, no, they don't come up very often. There aren't that many. So fast forward a year, I was at another conference and I saw the gentleman again, and I asked him, and he goes, well, matter of fact, we might have an opportunity coming up here in this spring. This was in 1987. And so I followed through on it, and lo and behold, I came for an interview to SHAPE in Casteau, Belgium, outside of Mons, and was selected for this position that was in the SHAPE legal office, and that started a career of 18 years working at SHAPE, and also permitted me to continue in the reserves with the establishment of a new Marine Corps headquarters in Stuttgart. So I was able to participate, which has led me into the battle study aspect of the whole, Belleau Wood process.
So you ended up at SHAPE in Belgium at exactly the same time as an MIA. World War I service members. The remains were discovered in a field outside of Belleau, and the remains were attributed to be a Marine, and there was a re-internment ceremony, which is the last burial that has happened at the Enmarn American Cemetery. Were you a part of that ceremony?
Yeah, that was a very interesting situation. They found the remains in the spring of 1988, close to Hill 142. They asked, the farmer found it in a drainage ditch and contacted the authorities, who then contacted the embassy, and they went through a program, their recovery of remains, the Department of Defense, and the superintendent at the cemetery, the Enmarn Cemetery, which was right nearby, of course, he inquired as to what they were going to do with the remains, and he was told they were going to, since it was an unknown American and all the cemeteries in Europe were closed, that they were going to inter the remains in England at a cemetery. I'm not sure where it is, but it's the only one that remains open, I guess, for presumably World War II Americans that are found somewhere in Europe. that gentleman didn't think that was such a great idea. So he contacted the Marine attaché in Paris at the embassy, who then contacted headquarters Marine Corps, and that's how General Gray got involved in it. And there was some, there's obviously some discussion about what service this young man was in. I mean, it was the remains were identified as a young person, late teens, early 20s, which would fit the profile of an American soldier. But whether it was a Marine or an Army soldier, was never really, identified or, established. But General Gray apparently said, well, that, as far as, we're concerned, it was a Marine, and so we think he ought to be buried at Belleau Wood. And he had a heart-to-heart discussion with the superintendent of the American Battle Miners Commission, who said, "That's a great idea, General Gray. We'll do that." So they opened the cemetery there for that ceremony in November, just before Veterans Day in 1988, and there was a funeral.
I went to the Marine Corps archives at Quantico to try and find the answer to the question, what was the first instance of Marines going to the Devil Dog Fountain, or what we now know as the Devil Dog Fountain? And it seemed that it had corresponded with this re-internment ceremony where a group of Marines then crossed the road from the cemetery, or maybe there was time before the ceremony and they were exploring around Belleau and ended up at the fountain. I don't know if you were also with this same group that came over to the fountain during that couple day period of time.
Well, anytime a Marine is, at Belleau Wood, or the village of Belleau, which is right next door, you're encouraged to go down to the Devil Dog Fountain. And I'm not sure, where the Devil Dog Fountain, the whole idea comes from, to be honest. I mean, I'm not sure the record is very clear about when that started.
It's the first piece of documentation that I could find. I have been unable to find any earlier publication or photo from before that point. I've also interviewed several of the families in the town, and to their recollection, it was sometime during the 1980s. It's a big interest of mine because it is squarely a pilgrimage site that has emerged relatively recently. We know within the past couple of decades, whether it is as late as the 1980s or before that, it certainly wasn't a place that was visited right after the war and not during the interwar era. And really, even up into the 50s, I think that with the Marine Monument being established in the mid-1950s, if the fountain was significant, I do think it would have been written about during that time.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, thinking about it, that was the first time that I went to it, that period.
Was it known as the Devil Dog Fountain at that point, or the Bulldog Fountain?
Probably both. But as the Marines, the Marine Corps headquarters in Stuttgart was established in 1993, and that's when, moving on to the development of the battlefield guide, that's when we started to think about Marines coming to Belleau Wood, and not just coming to the cemetery and possibly going up to the Belleau Wood and look at the Marine Memorial, but also participate in some kind of a staff ride, what we call a staff ride or a tour, and understand what happened there. I mean, that had never been done before. And as a result, more and more people then learned about the fountain. And it was just, you go down to the Devil Dog Fountain, and you drink the water and you'll live forever type thing,
Oh, it's got great lore around it.
Yeah.
The lore is fantastic. I mean, this idea of either living forever or living for an extra 20 years, or I've heard also it extends one's career in the Marine Corps. It just happens to coincide with 20 years. So
Your next
the
promotion.
lore is fantastic.
Yeah.
So were you part of this group then, or a series of groups in the 90s that was coming into, or that were coming into the woods to clear debris and to kind of improve the pathways through the woods?
Not specifically, but I helped coordinate with the superintendent at the cemetery with the Marines in Stuttgart at the Marine Forces headquarters. That's where all those guys came from. There was a group, I think, came from the Marine Security Guard detachment in Paris at one point. But mostly all those efforts of cleaning and cutting up trees and that kind of stuff was done by Marines from Stuttgart, from the Marine headquarters.
And did that occur on the weekends, or were they coming over as part of, like, how does that sort of structurally work?
Yeah, they took leave. Many of them took leave during the week because they wanted to work in connection with the building and grounds group, the staff at the cemetery, and they didn't work Saturday and Sunday for the most part. So they would come, and I know they camped out. I mean, they camped out in Belleau Wood. They brought, their own camping materials, tents and sleeping bags and the whole thing. And, MREs, they ate, MREs, and they stayed there for several days while they're doing that. And one of the guys, I guess, had a truck, and they loaded the back of the truck with all bits and pieces of wood because he was a woodworking guy. So they came back, and for years, I don't know if it's still true, maybe it's still true, that when you leave Marine Forces Europe headquarters, they give you, the traditional military plaque, thank you, while you've been here. And shortly after the mid-90s, all the plaques from there were now made of wood from Belleau Wood that this guy had collected.
Is that still?
I think it is. I think they're still going down there and collecting, pieces of wood that they can use for those plaques. I wouldn't be surprised.
It's a really interesting part of the travel and pilgrimages to places like Belleau Wood, which is how people remove pieces of the natural environment, whether that is soil. There are accounts of soil being planted in the United States and buried at cemeteries. There's an example in Maine where this happened, or of course the trees, or bringing seedlings. I know there's an initiative you're probably aware of planting trees from Belleau Wood, and this sort of took shape at North Carolina State University, which is my alma mater. This initiative to plant trees, and certainly now the water from the fountain people bring with them. Even in the museum now, there are small bottles, much like other holy wells, where sites sell the bottles so that people can take back water, take it home, or to give to other people.
This becomes similar to sands of Iwo Jima from Iwo Jima.
Yes.
That's another great souvenir that Marines carry around.
And a lot of Marines I've talked to speak about having water from the fountain or soil from Belleau Wood alongside the sands from.
I do.
So you do?
Yeah.
Do you also have water from the fountain?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Did you take something with you to put the water in, or did you get one of the bottles from the museum?
I think the first time I went there, the museum wasn't open, and so I just I took a big French 1-liter water bottle and basically filled it up, and then stuck it in my luggage and wrapped it up really carefully, and brought it back. Then when they started to do the museum, probably about the late 90s, then they did the little bottles, and I did that. And the last time I was there was in 2018. And I think I bought like half a dozen bottles, and filled them up, brought all those back. So, I've been, I handed them out to various friends and stuff too. I've got a
What
few
was it
left.
like to be there in 2018?
Spectacular. Just absolutely, just unbelievable. The weather was magnificent the whole weekend. So Saturday was, we did the staff rides and the tours and all the various groups, and we had a, cast of thousands. 5 or 6 big buses going around at one time or another. And then Sunday was just thousands. Have you seen the videos online of that particular ceremony? It was really almost standing room only in the entire cemetery, around the, the kind of the central courtyard there of the cemetery. And it was just quite spectacular, with the French Army unit, the German Army unit, and the Marines silent drill team did a performance. It was just the music, the bands. It was just spectacular.
I've been able to be there for Memorial Day in 2023 and 2024, and the numbers are not as impressive as they were in 2018, but I certainly can relate to exactly what you're talking about. The ceremony at the cemetery is moving and grand, and the pomp and circumstance is fantastic. And seeing, as you said, the American, primarily Marines, and the French and the Germans together, and then the procession down the hill into Belleau, and finally this reception in the courtyard of the Devil Dog Fountain. It's quite remarkable, and certainly unlike any other type of Memorial Day ceremony or commemoration that I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, it's quite spectacular. And the way it's supported by the French population, the local population, is just remarkable, to be honest. It's just they, the local schools do an essay contest, for what does Belleau Wood mean to me, or something like that, and they select a winner, and the young person gets up and reads their essay or their poem or whatever they've done, and it's just really fascinating thing to behold. Very rewarding, I think.
It is rewarding, and it's rewarding and humbling, actually, to see the effort and the appreciation and the support of the local French people and the department level, as well as the state. It is a reminder that they have not forgotten the sacrifices of Americans, and of course of their own people, who the war was literally on their doorstep. And it is a ceremony I wish more people could attend, definitely more Americans. So I'd like to go back and just touch a little bit about the writing process for the Bravest Deeds of Men. And I'm curious if you set out to write this field guidebook, or did it happen over the course of years based on notes, and you realized that there was a need to put this into book form?
Well, it started with the informal collection of guys that would show up at the cemetery on Memorial Day weekend on Saturday from Germany, for the most part, and a couple of guys would come down with me from Shape, and I'd always wanted to know more about it, more about the battle, And I found a book called At Belleau Wood by Robert Asprey, which was probably the only really decent account published in the 60s. And kind of a general overview of the battle. And so with that, in hand, I would, on Saturdays, I started to look around to see, well, what else was going on here? And the fighting at Belleau Wood was not just in Belleau Wood itself. That was kind of the focal point and the culminating point of the battle. But there was fighting all around in different places. A place called Lemaire's Farm to the west, and a place called Hill 142, and then also in a village called Boresh on the eastern flank of Belleau Wood. And once I kind of discovered that, I figured, well, gosh, let's go around and take a look at these places too. And I found a copy of a 1918 map. A gentleman came out, and I can't remember when it was. It was in that mid-90s period when a French gentleman came up to me, and he saw that we were kind of walking around. And he said, in French, he said, this might be useful, and it was rolled up. And it was a copy of the Ordnance Survey map of 1918 of the area. And it kind of just put everything into kind of perspective. And then I realized, going to these different places, that the roads were the same, that the tree lines were the same, the different wooded areas were the same. The ravines were the same. I mean, nothing had changed. I mean, they hadn't paved it over. They hadn't paved over Paradise and put up a parking lot, to quote Joni Mitchell. It hadn't changed. And then once I realized that, then I guess there was a gentleman, the brigadier general in Stuttgart at the time was named Mike Hagee, who ended up being the commandant of the Marine Corps. And while he was there, and I'd known him from when I was at headquarters Marine Corps, and we, sat down with him, and he said, well, God, we got to put we got to make some kind of a formal thing. And that's how that all transpired. So over the years, it got better and better on that Saturday. And then in 1998, which was the anniversary, the 80th anniversary, we planned on having, and I was still at the headquarters before I retired, the Marine headquarters, that we wanted to do something really. This is going to be a big thing. General Krulak, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps, was coming, and all this, it was going to be a big deal. And so we formalized a structure of the tour, which became a staff ride, in that when you, at a particular stop around the battlefield, you would talk about what happened there. And then if you were with a group of Marines, you would, prior to that, ask them to identify someone who was going to say, talk about something, do some research, and then say, okay, Sergeant Anderson, what were they thinking while they were here? And this kind of led, to the formation of kind of a booklet, just a very informal inch of paper of things we'd put together at these particular stops. And then I guess I left, when I left in 2005, we had pretty much formulated a pamphlet, a piece of paper, document, Operation Devil Dog, so we called it. And I came back, but I always had in the back of my mind that there ought to be something more formal, to do. And I toyed around with doing a staff ride pamphlet like they did for the Army War College. And I just, it just didn't seem to be the right thing to do. So as we got up to the I was kind of a fellow in the history division there in the early teens, I guess, 2010, 11, 12. I was teaching at the Command and Staff College and the distance education program. And so I was hanging out in the history division, and we started talking about the centennial in 2018. And that led to discussions about, well, let's do a series of, battle studies, from Belleau Wood, Mont Blanc, Blanc-Mont, Meuse-Argonne, Saint-Mihiel, various places where the Marines fought. And I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity for me to do this battlefield guide, which turned out to be what they published in 2018.
It's always been remarkable to me as I am walking through Belleau Wood and exploring the exact observation that you just shared about how it looks so similar to the way that it did in 1918. And for people who have not been there are cleared paths that one can walk on, but there are also trenches, there are artillery crater holes, there are scarred trees. At the very top of the tree, there's still some evidence in some places of the war. There are boulders that are in the same locations, and the terrain, the topography is grown over now with shrubs and other small, in some cases, small flowers, but moss and this type of thing. And I'm curious about what particular natural features you really made observations about. Are there places that really stand out to you inside the woods that are really tied to the events of 1918?
Well, the area around the Marine Memorial is significant because it's kind of a focal point. But a lot of that area, is I use the term manicured in a way. It's cleaned up, it's cleared out. It's there's a road going through there and the trails. But the most significant part to me in Belleau Wood itself is in the southeast corner, where you go into the woods from the village of Baresh, and you cross the Gobert Creek, and you go up and you start going up in the terrain changes. And at the top of that small elevated area, there's these large boulders that are oriented around and with fighting holes where the Germans were obviously, looking at it from a military perspective, where would you want to put your men if you were defending someone coming from the south into Belleau Wood there, and you would put them in that area. And that's when I found that, I think that was the most significant thing for me that I experienced while I was in the woods there myself.
What about it is so significant for you?
Well, it's just it's grown over. You could see where you could have a battle there, and it becomes a 3-meter war. I mean, it's not one of these wide open fields where men are crossing a field or fighting from trench line to trench line. Once you got into the wood, it was like you were enveloped in all the vegetation and everything. And it's described by, in fact, described by General Rommel, who wrote a book, Attacks, about World War I. And he describes fighting in a wood where you lose control of your men as a lieutenant. You don't know who's in front of you, who's behind you. People are shooting in their various directions. You can't see anything beyond about 3 or 4 meters. And to me, when I stood up on this elevated area looking down toward the village of Baresh, it just occurred to me that's exactly what happened here. And I could just I could just feel myself being there at the time almost. I think that's the most significant part to me, that I found on my own.
It's really important. I've discovered in my research around pilgrimages to battlefields, but particularly to World War I battlefields. People who are visiting these places, who have a deep interest in the war, are often doing so because they want very, very specific information. They want precision in terms of where a particular action happened, or they're following in the footsteps of a particular soldier or a Marine. And it isn't good enough to come into the proximity of where events happened. It is a driving motivator is to find exactly where the events happened. And I wonder about your thoughts about this. I mean, certainly you've written a guidebook, so you're also driven by this same passion to find precise spots.
Well, I mean, it adds a lot to any kind of a staff ride or a tour. And I don't like to use the word tour as much, because that's that kind of means you're driving around the bus, you get off the bus for 5-10 minutes, and this is what happened here. You get back on the bus. But when we do it, we try to you're there for 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes talking about what happened there. And so there are certain areas within the Belleau Wood battle space where you can do certain things like that. I mean, you can be pretty specific about what happened at a particular point and go to that point, whether it's at Lemaire's farm, or Hill 142, or in Belleau Wood itself, or in Baresh. I mean, we know that in the Battle of Baresh, the Marines got into the village through a ditch, kind of a drainage ditch area that's still there. I mean, and you actually stand and say, well, this is where they came into the village, because it's, again, the village hasn't changed that much in 100 years. But there are some situations like that. I mean, there are some families that I know have gone to Belleau Wood and been given a pretty good idea of what happened where they were. And I know that's difficult in a fluid situation where you can get pretty close to where something happened, but you can't find the exact spot. But I know it's when a family goes and their grandfather, died at and they know what company he was in and where that company was and where they went. And there are some burial records of battlefield burials that took place that can be pretty specific in terms of where the burial took place, which was near where they were buried where they fell. So I know that can be important to some folks for sure.
I just finished writing a paper which will be published in an anthology that I'm editing later this year, in a few months, about the natural environment in Belleau Wood and what it affords for pilgrims visiting. General Harbord wrote about the natural environment and what it afforded the Marines who were fighting there. And so this is sort of an extension of that now that the woods are peaceful and a place of pilgrimage, that the natural environment offers the opportunity to engage in a certain way for people who are visiting or for pilgrims. And many Marines now that are coming to Belleau Wood, particularly post 2018, who have read your book, The Bravest Deeds of Men, have this in mind when they're visiting, or maybe they even have a copy while they're there. They also have in mind all of the stories that they've heard about Belleau Wood, either at the basic school or from places like Paris Island at boot camp. And it seems to me that this has formed a type of authoritative canon for Marines, that they're drawing from these sources, and I've labeled then what happens for them as kind of the natural environment of Belleau Wood offers a canonical affordance, that the places that they're seeing, the boulders that they are standing next to, or the trench or artillery crater, they are bringing with them all of this information that people like you have written about. And it seems pretty significant to have contributed as a writer and as a thinker to the way that these Marines are engaging inside the woods.
Well, I thank you for flattering me. I don't know if I certainly didn't start out with this project, some years ago with, wanting to make a name for myself. The whole idea was to preserve something for Marines. I was approached some years back about, because I know some Army guys, they end up publishing commercially something that it appears that they worked on while they were, an Army historian, and that never occurred to me. I mean, my whole point was that I was doing this for Marines so that they would have something that they could put in their hip pocket, walk around the battlefield, get an understanding what took place there, look at the maps, go to places where, look at the map and go to that place and then think about what was going on there, and look out across the wheat field into Belleau Wood and think, how did those guys do that? How could they possibly have done that? But they did it. And so if it turns out to be my legacy, then that's very gratifying for sure.
In terms of Bill Anderson, the person, it's really difficult to go to Belleau Wood and it not become a part of us. I mean, it's difficult to think in my lifetime that I'll ever not have a very, very special affinity for Belleau Wood. And I'm not alone in that. Most people who travel to Belleau Wood and who have been there and toured around, they end up coming back, or they can't wait to get back. And for many Marines who have never been there, it is oftentimes a lifelong dream to be able to visit Belleau Wood. I'm curious how you, as a person and also as a Marine, how does the experience of being at Belleau Wood impact you?
Well, I think it's just a question of the affection for a place that has meant so much to me in the last 30 years of going there, showing others what happened there, and it's it's like going home in some sense. I mean, I again, I haven't been back since 2018 for a variety of reasons, physical among others. But it's like you walk if you walk into the cemetery parking lot and walk into the cemetery, it's like, well, I'm back. It's like I've never left. It hasn't, and of course the significance of that is, again, as I said before, it hasn't changed any. It's still a beautiful place. The cemetery is beautiful. What they do up in Belleau Wood around Marine Memorial is just just spectacular. And if you're there at the right time of the year, which is really important, and the weather is nice. It's just a gorgeous part of the French countryside. That's just makes it a pleasure to walk around. And if you're there at the right time when the wheat is up or whatever's growing in the fields, it's just spectacular. It's just so fulfilling, I guess, is a right word for me. Spiritually, I guess. I know that's what you're looking at, and I think that's true. I mean, it's just something that's to me personally, it's just been a very important part of my life the last 30 years. But of course, the individual Marine who goes there, some young corporal, lance corporal, or sergeant, I mean, he may get there once in his lifetime, but if he's been there once and he remembers and he thinks, gosh, these guys were pretty special, the guys that were here in 1918, the 4th Marine Brigade. And I try to emphasize the fact that, they weren't supermen. They were just like you, and they were about the same age as you. And they were given a task, and they did it. And against all odds, they did it. And those traditions, carry down the ages, as they say.
After having visited so many times and this place feels like home and it's become a part of you, and in some way you are a part of it now, do you find yourself going in a particular order or following a particular series of stops when you visit now? Or do you just talked about starting parking at the cemetery, and I'm assuming walking up past the memorial chapel and into the woods that way? Or do you come in from Bravest and then park inside the woods?
Well, usually, I mean, when I have been there, I've been, going according to an itinerary that we set up, and which is basically the one that's in the battlefield guide. Orient yourself around the cemetery parking lot there in the administration building, and then go to Lemaire's farm as the first place, and then just kind of work your way around the battlefield. So if I'm not doing that, I might go directly into Bravest and then go to one of the cafe there, the 1775 cafe. See if they're open. If that's I have an opportunity to do that. But I rarely sightsee that much in terms of not being there for a particular purpose.
So it's important for you then, because you're there with groups of people, you're going to be following the order of events from June 1918 as the Marines progressed day after day in June of 1918.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Do you have any examples of the type of what do Marines say to you after they have gone on this not tour but staff ride?
Well, I mean, many of them just are very grateful. Thank you. They come up and say thank you very much. It's been, it was really enjoyed it. I have an anecdote. You were asking me earlier about anecdotes. In 2018, I had started several years before that looking at the German accounts, trying to get a better perspective of, and that's what I tried to put into the battlefield guide was, what was going on the other side in terms of military history, because quite often military history is just one-sided. You just, how we won the war, whatever, or lost the war, I guess. So during the Saturday tour in 2018, which was what they referred to as the VIP bus, which involved the Commandant, General Neller, who I knew, and a couple of guys had been at SHAPE, who were retired as general officers, and wives and staff and all that kind of stuff, and a big one of those big European coaches. And we would stop and we do at the various places, and I'd talk about what was going on, and then I'd also add about what was going on from the Germans, what the German unit was. Excuse me. What they were thinking, what they were planning. What problems they had, which the Germans had a lot of problems with. Casualties and influenza began to show itself in the German army there in June 1918. And so at the end, which we end the tour up on at the Marine Memorial, talking about the final battle, walking down toward the hunting lodge, and then as we came back to the coach there. At the memorial, a young lady came up to me and introduced herself as being an U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel who was the U.S. liaison officer to the German Army headquarters. And I go, oh, great. And I said, what do you think? She said, I really liked it. She said, but can you stand by here for a few minutes because General so-and-so, and I can't remember his name, which is a shame. But anyway, she said, General so-and-so would like to speak to you. And I said, well, who's General so-and-so? She said, oh, he's the commander of the German army. He was on the tour with you today. I think I'd probably turn white as a sheet, thinking, oh my gosh. Well, anyway, so very distinguished gentleman in civilian clothes comes up to me and introduced himself. And he gave me one of these, the typical challenge coin, except it's huge. It's much bigger than the traditional kind of American coin. And then he said how much he appreciated the whole tour, especially my comments about the German army and the problems they had. And, I've never forgot that. I thought that was the finest compliment I think I've ever received in all the years that I've been doing it.
It is meaningful to see how educational trips, staff rides bring people together, and that the Germans are very much a part of this and increasing numbers, and to see Belleau Wood become a place of a symbol of reconciliation and a symbol of military and cultural alliances. And I have a growing curiosity about the German perspective on this turn of events, because I have also, as I mentioned, being there in 2023 and 2024, have noted their presence and their enthusiasm about being a part of the ceremony at the cemetery, and then the events afterward, and also the tour through Belleau Wood before the ceremony starts. And the ceremony that has now been added at the German cemetery before the main Memorial Day ceremony the day before. So do you have thoughts around this, around how these battlefields, I mean, we're talking about the case of Belleau Wood, but I think it could apply to other battlefields as well, or monuments, how they can become focal points for reconciliation and focal points for dialogue about moving forward in an alliance together?
Well, absolutely. I think that's a very important idea about these battlefield cemeteries, especially at Belleau Wood, where you have the German cemetery so close to the American cemetery. And I'm not sure if that's true in other places. But there's 8,000 German soldiers buried in that small little plot. I guess former enemies have a great tradition of coming together as veterans and talking about how hard it was, but then they meet as colleagues, as guys who experience the same hardships and the terrors of the battlefield. I know from my wife's perspective, whose great uncle was killed in a B-17 crash in September 1943, as he was a ball turret gunner. I know from reading those accounts about where German officers, the Luftwaffe pilots, came together with crews of the B-17s, and there was a great affinity, of fellow soldiers coming together and talking about their experiences, on the battlefield. And then with cemeteries, the remembrance of, the sacrifice of those soldiers, and you honor those sacrifices, and you pay homage to each other as a veteran of the conflict as well.
The coming together of former enemies on a battlefield is interesting in the sense that there is certainly a slew of questions that opens up around why people were enemies to begin with, and how the average soldier or the average service member of across nations and across armies are often very similar, and in terms of just the being human and often driven to serve their country in some way, or in other cases are conscripted into military service. And so visiting these places together, I think, also can have mental health or psychological benefits in terms of shared experience and a sense of belonging, and a kind of shared humanity. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around how either visiting these places, which is becoming more common in terms of cross-military visitations to battlefields, whether this is potentially significant in terms of the psychological benefits, and whether visiting battlefields, period, has any type of mental health benefits that you've observed.
I haven't really observed that much in terms of with veterans, say post 9/11 veterans, but I know that they have done that. They have gone to Belleau Wood with various organizations, very historical tour company or whatever, and I'm confident that they do get some benefit out of going there. it helps that the place is so pretty and peaceful. I know that there was, I don't know if you're familiar with the Stricker story, the guy buried in the village cemetery. Yeah, that was a sad story. In 1928, I think he killed himself, and he was an army soldier and committed suicide up in Belleau Wood, near the hunting lodge, and the village mayor, that they were so touched by that whole situation that they authorized him to be buried in the village cemetery, where he is now. But he left a note where he said that he he was having some physical problems, probably as a result of wounds, and he just wanted to be at peace with the guys he served with, or something like that. Fortunately, we haven't had any situations like that, post 9/11. But I think that I think the Wounded Warrior Project has done, or the Wounded Warrior Regiment, sorry, at Quantico has done some tours, has gone to Belleau Wood as part of their rehabilitation program, and with great success, I think.
I didn't know that. Thank you for.
I think they have. I don't know. I'd have to check on that, but I recall
I'll
something
definitely
about
look
that.
into that. The last question I have, or the last theme I'd like to ask you about, has to do with the idea of being a pilgrim. You have not mentioned that during our conversation, and I do not know if that is how you consider yourself when you visit Belleau Wood, or if you consider the visits that you have made there as a pilgrimage, and I wanted to check in about that.
Well, the term pilgrimage to me has always had a religious connotation, so I don't know if I'm in a situation to comment on terms of it, returning there as a pilgrimage. But I know the word has been used. I mean, in terms of being in terms of the Marine Corps tradition and lore, it's a holy site. It's one of the touchstone battles of the Marine Corps, from Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Chosin Reservoir, and Belleau Wood, and it always pops up. So it's a place where you go and honor those who were there before. I mean, and I guess in terms of a pilgrimage, so you could say that you go there and you try to leave with more than you took, so that it does something for you. It makes you feel better. So in that sense, you could say it is a pilgrimage. You feel better after having gone there, and I think that's probably true in many respects. I mean, most Marines, if you talk to, you say, have you ever been to Belleau Wood? Yeah. What do you think? It was great. I mean, I felt really good about it being there, and I'm really glad I went. And that's, you could say that's close to religious experience as well. I don't know.
The other adjacent religious experience or religious term that I wanted to ask you about, and earlier in a written conversation, exchange of messages that we had about the Bravest Deeds of Men, you mentioned that felt like a calling to write that book. And if you're comfortable, I'd like to hear more about that.
It took me about 10 years really to put all that stuff together. And there were times when I thought that this, it's not going to work out. I mean, it's too much. It's probably just too much to ask to put all this stuff together in a meaningful package and then make it make it, something that people will actually want to get a copy and then take it to the battlefield. And I think I always felt in the back of my mind that there was a reason why I was kind of driven to do this, and it was something that was telling me that the good Lord put me on the earth there in France, and Belgium for a reason, and one of those reasons was to put this project together and write the book. I mean, no one had ever done it before. No one had ever spent any time as much as I had spent there. There have been a number of articles and written in the Gazette or the Lennox over the years about certain aspects, but I always thought that they were so kind of inadequate. I mean, they were interesting articles to read, but they didn't give you a whole picture of the whole, what transpired there from from the first part of June until they left in the 20th of June, 25th of June, 26th of June. And I had the desire to do that. I had the desire to make something that people would want to take with them there to go there and understand what happened there. And I took a little inspiration in some of the Civil War battlefield guides, for sure, that I'd seen written about, and I admired what they had done, and that's the kind of thing that I wanted to do, and I think it's something, I just sounds like a cliche, but like I was meant to do. I mean, if it wasn't for me, it wouldn't be done. No one would have done it, anything like that. And I was there. Then I came back to Virginia in 2005 when I retired from the NATO position, and I got involved in History Division, and we started talking about 2018 and the centennial, and it all kind of just fell together.
It's been helpful to me in shaping my understanding even before I went to Belleau Wood for the first time. I've used it while I've been in the woods to help orient to certain places that I am visiting. And I have heard repeatedly that it's been helpful to other people. So the impact, I think, has been wide-reaching for this project. And I appreciate the fact that you stuck with it for a decade, despite the obstacles of it all coming together. I have been a beneficiary of your work, and I would like to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I appreciate that.
Where is the book still? Is it available online? Sometimes I've had difficulty when people have asked me about it. Where can it be found?
Well, yeah, the Marine Corps University Press published the original version in 2018, and I think I'm trying to think what the run was. It was like 1,500 copies. Well, they're all gone now. So one of the projects this year is to do a revision of, second edition this year.
Great.
And those copies are free. Now, I noticed fairly soon after Marine Corps published, one showed up on eBay or Amazon. Sorry. So you can get a copy on Amazon. You have to pay for it, like $12 or something, a paperback, which has got all the stuff in there and all the maps, but it's not as convenient as the ring binder version that we published in terms of being able to fold the pages so you can look at the maps. But,
yes.
So that's available for purchase as a commercial. The the free one by the Marine Corps. Again, we're coming out. We're going to work on a second edition this year. And there were some there's some errors and little things here and there, and typos that everybody missed over. You get a whole editorial board, and everybody missed something. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and for taking time to talk about Belleau Wood and your experience as a Marine and the process of writing the Bravest Deeds of Men, and for sharing about the places inside Belleau Wood that are so meaningful to you and to other people. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for asking me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you as well, and thank you for all your work that you've been doing in terms of preserving some of these ideas about visiting battlefields.